All right, welcome everybody for Quarantine Storytime, Volume 3. Per my friend Jesse's request, we're going to have a little bit of water here to keep my throat dry, or my throat wet. Cheers to everyone out there in quarantine land. I hope everyone is staying healthy. Pay attention to your friends and family. This is a time for the working class to come together. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to do with this quarantine story time. I got a good selection for you guys, but I want to talk quickly about my intentions here. After reading that Miwok poem from last week, I want to thank everyone for lending me their time and their ears. I'm very happy to be lending you my voice and my time as well. We're all alone to each other on this planet, and eventually death is going to come and collect. But not before it's time, of course. I really want to spark an interest in literature by talking about literature openly, but also sort of reading straight from books. Everyone maybe has some books sitting around. This is a great time to check in on them. Make sure all the pages are still there, read through a little bit, get some more books. A lot of small bookstores are selling directly online, so you don't need to go to Amazon.com. I also want to obviously provide a little bit of calm before bed. It's hard to know when's daytime and nighttime if you're staying home. And if you're working, maybe it's a little bit stressful. But also, of course, literature and oral storytelling. These are ancient traditions that go back across every culture. They have always connected humans, and I'm hoping that they continue to connect us, and that's why I'm doing this. So I just wanted to share a little bit about that. Let's talk about our selection of literature for tonight. I'm going to start out with a doozy here. You guys know I like that magic realism. I've got 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to try and read through the first chapter because it's just magical. It's beautiful. Something to take up your time, but also to give you something to think about because, of course, magic realism is a very political genre. Then we're going to move over to, we're going to read some Shel Silverstein, The Missing Piece. In fact, I might start with this one because it's light and it's beautiful. A story from my childhood. Shout out to my mom, Marla. Here we go. I want to read the first chapter or the first part of this book, The Destruction of California by Raymond F. Dasmann. This book is fascinating. It talks about the changes California has gone through from essentially a big garden of food that people were able to live on to a large managed state that we live in right now. And I really like reading just the first chapters or the introductions of books, sometimes just to myself to get an idea for the book, for the tone of the author. So that's why I'm reading just a little bit for you guys. If you enjoy it, you can check out the book yourself or encourage me, and I can read more. I don't mind reading a book in series, but I don't want to spend the entire evening reading one. If we have time, we'll get to Borges, Imaginary Beings. Otherwise, we'll get to that next time. I know I skipped it last time on accident. And then, of course, I want to end with the tale of Hisik the Skunk from the Legends of the Yosemite Miwok. Let's get started with a little bit of Shel Silverstein right here, The Missing Piece. It was missing a piece, and it was not happy. So it set off in search of its missing piece. And as it rolled, it sang this song. Oh, I'm looking for my missing piece. I'm looking for my missing piece. Heidi-ho, here I go, looking for my missing piece. Now, Mom, did I sing that the way you used to sing it? Sometimes it baked in the sun. But then the cool rain would come down. And sometimes it was frozen by the snow, but then the sun would come and warm it again. And because it was missing a piece, it could not roll very fast. So it would stop to talk to a worm. Or smell a flower. Now check out the Oakland Hills. The wildflowers are beautiful, y'all. And sometimes it would pass a beetle. And sometimes the beetle would pass it. And this was the best time of all. Gotta skip a page. And on it went over oceans. Oh, I'm looking for my missing piece. Over land and overseas. So grease my knees and fleece my bees. I'm looking for my missing piece. Through swamps and jungles. And up mountains. And down mountains. I felt today while hiking a little bit. Until one day, lo and behold, I found my missing piece. It sang, I found my missing piece. So grease my knees and fleece my bees. I found my... Wait a minute, said the piece. Before you go greasing your knees and fleecing your bees, I am not your missing piece. I'm nobody's piece. I am my own piece. And even if I was somebody's missing a piece, I don't think I'd be yours. Oh, it said sadly, I'm sorry to have bothered you. And it rolled on. And it found another piece. Wow. But this one was too small. Oh no. And this one was too big. This one was a little too sharp. Well, I had that relationship. And this one was too square. That's the worst. One time it seemed to have found the perfect piece, but it didn't hold tightly enough. And lost it. And another time it held too tightly. And it broke. Oh my. There you go. And so on and on it rolled. Having adventures. Falling into holes. And bumping into stone walls. And then one day it came upon another piece that seemed to be just right. Hi, it said. Hoy, said the piece. Are you anybody else's missing piece? Not that I know of. Well, maybe you want to be your own piece? Or it can be someone else's and still be my own. Well, maybe you don't want to be mine. Maybe I do. Maybe we won't fit. Well, it fit. It fit perfectly. At last, at last. And away it rolled, and because it was now complete, it rolled faster and faster, faster than it had ever rolled before, so fast that it could not stop to talk to a worm or smell a flower. Too fast for a butterfly to land. Uh-oh. But it could sing its happy song. At last it could sing, I found my missing piece. And it began to sing, I found my missing geese. I found my missing brief. So crazy my miss and please my dreams was found. Oh my. Now that was complete. Now that it was complete, it could not sing at all. Uh-oh. Aha, I thought. So that's how it was. And so it stopped rolling. And it set the piece down gently. And slowly rolled away. This beautiful little leaf just fell out of the book. And as it rolled, it softly sang, oh, I'm looking for my missing piece. I'm looking for my missing piece. Heidi-ho, here I go. I'm looking for my missing piece. The end. Shel Silverstein, The Missing Piece. Wow. What powerful lessons from these children's authors. I can't believe I'm learning more from the Missing Piece than I've learned from some of my college textbooks right now. So I mentioned I was hiking around a little bit earlier. I want to encourage everyone to safely enjoy the outdoors. The more we appreciate nature, the more motivation we will have to conserve it and also to respect the land in general. I put a link there. There's for people in the Bay Area, there's a lot of areas that have ancient history, indigenous history, that are easy to hike to, and being able to appreciate those is really a gift and a privilege in the Bay Area. We're here on Ohlone land, and I enjoyed today visiting some pretty ancient sites around Castro Valley that are actually just off the road and strangely neglected out there, but really the Bay Area has been a good place to live for thousands of years. So let's take care of it. Along with that theme, let's read a little bit of The Destruction of California. This is by Raymond F. Dasmann. This book was, I should note, when you're listening to this man speak, this book is from 1965, and he was already talking about some challenges that faced California. Cheers to Jesse Cervantes if you're watching. A not so golden state. This is a quote. California occupies a badly fractured and unstable segment of the thin earth crust along a coast rising from the sea. C.L. Clamp from the book Earth Song. It is easy to write of distant lands visited for a month or a year or two, viewed objectively and then left behind. It is difficult to write of your homeland. There are too many sides to every mountain. Too much tradition lurks by each stream side. Memories cloak cities. No fact is simply a fact. It has shades of meaning that defy any clear statement. In driving across the Bay Bridge early in 1963, I saw the sign erected to dramatize the population race between California and New York. There was no question who would win, on the board, if not in reality. The New York population remained nearly stationary, while that of California climbed at the known rate of increase. In just a few minutes required to drive past, the figures increased disturbingly. There were those who found joy in this race and celebrated California's supposed victory. But to some of us, there seemed scant cause for rejoicing, just more evidence of the change overtaking the state. a change toward what all portents showed to be a less desirable condition. On the far end of the Bay Bridge was San Francisco, her skyline looming against the bank of fog rolling in over the hills from the Pacific. Here was still the Queen City, where the sheer geography of location yet defies the efforts of those who care nothing for beauty. The blue of the bay, the glittering stretch of the Golden Gate, the skyline dominated by Diablo and Tamalpais, the array of peninsulas and islands form a setting that would glorify even the most wretched slum. But San Francisco, to me, is too much a city of memories, haunted by ghosts of the past. It was here that I was born and spent many of my early years. Always I have returned after sojourns in far-off places, and each time I have been again impressed by the magnificence and captivated by the charm of the city. The perspective of time, however, allows me to ask whether the changes that have taken place are for the better or for the worse. Try as I may, I cannot feel that things are now better. It is no nostalgia for a past youth that prompts this feeling. I much prefer the life that I live today to anything that I had 20 years earlier. Instead, it is a solid objection to the physical changes that have taken place, and more than that, to a spiritual rot that seems to pervade much of the city. It was much more fun in San Francisco, and life was richer when we rode the ferry boats across the bay in 1937 than it is now when we battle the traffic on the bridges. Talking about traffic in 1965. It was more pleasant in 1939 when the Bay Bridge traffic was light and one could enjoy the view than it was when there were two Bay Bridges, both jammed with autos. The city was more beautiful when the freeways did not cut off the ferry building or obstruct the Civic Center. It was more pleasing to ride the cable cars over the city's hills than it was to ride the existing buses, as thousands of tourists prove each year by crowding the few remaining cables. It was a more exciting trip to go to the zoo on the old streetcar that rocketed along the tracks past the sand dunes than it is to travel by today's vehicles. San Francisco was a saner, more pleasant city before the great exodus of the middle class toward the suburbs began to blight its residential sections. It was a better city when men and women, boys and girls, could go anywhere outside, in the daylight or in dark in safety. Better than now when anyone, regardless of age or sex, risks his welfare or life by straying from the main tourist routes. When its parks and byways are left, when churches must be closed, because of the vandal and the pervert. I think the perverts were the priests. There is no point in a rebuttal that states the necessity of change caused by population growth, or that all this is an unfortunate byproduct of industrial progress and a regrettable temporary concomitant of other desirable gains. Any of these points can be granted. Admittedly, that the present population, the old ways would be intolerable. But admit that the city was a brighter, more human, more colorful, more fun place to be before this population growth and change, before the industrial gains and their byproduct losses. And if this is true, should one not ask whether future change should be tolerated if it is in the direction that will make life less pleasant? Quite recently, I traveled once more by plane to Los Angeles and was once more stunned by the sheer mass of the place. Appearing from the air as one great expanse of similar streets and houses from the mountains to the sea. Los Angeles is still colorful and exciting to those who visit it. Its living conditions, despite the smog, are sufficiently attractive to draw the masses from Iowa and Minnesota, Kansas, and Carolina to escape the blizzard and the summer humidity. But to one who can remember what it once was, there seems no cause for cheer. When Santa Monica was a glamorous seacoast place, San Gabriel, a colorful mission village, settled against its mountains. Westwood, a distinct college community. Hollywood, a fascinating world of its own, in spirit, if not geography. Is it better now that the whole mass is blended together and covered with a pall of smoke? Was it really worthwhile corralling the Colorado, channeling the waters of Northern California to effect this change? Will the future development make it worse or better? If you drive up the north coast from Eureka in the early hours when the mists have not been dispelled by the morning sunlight, you can build up a picture of how things once were and could be again in that region. One can ignore the ghosts of the forests of yesterday and concentrate only on the serried ranks of new trees growing on the logged or burnt over land. Damage is obscured. The raw edges of the land are blurred by mist. On the left is the blue sea, held flattened by some high pressure area so that no waves break on the black rock masses that stand above the waters, or against the headlands that drop sheer to thin stretches of sand beach. Timbered peninsulas and curving sandpits enclose the quiet lagoons. A haze covers the still prairies. Mile after mile one goes, and builds the feeling that this is the way the country should be, the way it was intended to look when the forces of creation had finished the job. Crescent City, viewed at sunrise from the ridge where the highway drops down to the plain, seems a sheer jewel of a town, built to fit around its little bay by some group of superior men with a view to how life should be arranged. But the light of midday dispels the grand illusion. The seams show through once more. In the late evening hours of summer, one might visit the grasslands and marshes that remain along the Owens River, one of my favorite places on planet Earth, actually. There you can see families of sage grouse scattered across the road. Shorebirds and a few ducks will fly by. Redwings will be chorusing from the cattails. In the distance, the sheer Sierra Wall towers against the sunset sky, and behind you, the last of the sunlight tops off the high peak of the White Mountains, challenging the Sierra in height and grandeur. Once more, the ugliness and rawness is obscured, and you can see the kind of world that we might still have. Or just drive up on Twin Peaks and look out over San Francisco on a late October afternoon. You still can. It has not been blocked off yet. In fact, they opened up a pedestrian pass. With the sun setting behind you and the city shining in the gold light of autumn, you can see it, and despite all that has happened, as the place that it could be. It is disturbing to a man to find himself out of step with the paradise of his times, or the parade of his time, even if he suspects that others also hear the beat of that different drum. I often wish I could join in the elation of the real estate developer. Build the suburb for tomorrow's masses, confident that the masses will come and his products will be in demand. Or the secure and comfortable feeling that must envelop the engineer, who, with full public support and approval, channels yet one more river towards the ever thirsty Southland, or builds one more power station on some previously unvanquished headland. To be in the organized army, even under an idiot commander, brings feelings of comradeship and security lacking to the guerrilla sniping from the rocks. But if the army is marching to the wrong place to fight the wrong battle for the wrong cause, what can you do? It has been said that the problems that face California today, America must meet tomorrow. The waves of the future break first on the rocky California coast. Change comes most rapidly. There is truth in this. It misses the point a little because no place is like any other place, and California is in many ways unique. Yet no one can afford to be unaware of the changes and difficulties that confront California. They are too likely to be the problems of all the civilized world. California has come a long way since the first man crossed its mountain passes and found it a good place for people. More than 4 centuries have passed since Cabrillo's ship stood off the Bay of San Diego. Almost 200 years have gone by since Padre Serra and the first settlers came northward. The 49ers of the 19th century who came seeking gold have been replaced by those of the 20th century who came following a dream. California still stands. It is better in many ways than the land that Cabrillo found. No one seriously wants to turn back the clock to make California once more a way station on the road to the Indies. Perhaps a little bit before that would be nice. But one can request seriously that in the headlong dash through the last half of the 20th century, we stop for a moment and take stock, and we ascertain our direction, and make sure that the world we are building in the West will be one worth living in. I'll leave it there. It's an important thing for us to be thinking about right now as we're in these very interesting, unprecedented times. Are we building a world that we want to live in? Are we building a world worth living in? We certainly aren't going to build it with Facebook arguments, so that's why I'm here reading stories to y'all. Let's move on a little bit. I think it's time to read a long excerpt. I'm going to try and read the first chapter from Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Cien Años de Soledad, 100 Years of Solitude, the only book I've read like 3 times. Only in English, unfortunately. One day I hope to be able to read it in Spanish. Some of you may know this first paragraph by heart. If so, read along. Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. At that time, Macondo was a village of 20 adobe houses, built on the banks of a river of clear water that ran along a bed of polished stones, which were white and enormous, like prehistoric eggs. The world was so recent that many things lacked names, and in order to indicate them, it was necessary to point. Every year during the month of March, a family of ragged gypsies would set up their tents near the village, and with a great uproar of pipes and kettle drums, they would display new innovations. First, they brought the magnet, a heavy gypsy with an untamed beard and sparrow hands, who introduced himself as Malquiades, put on a bold public demonstration of what he himself called the 8th wonder of the learned alchemists of Macedonia. He went from house to house, dragging 2 metal ingots, and everybody was amazed to see pots, pans, tongs, braziers tumble down from their places, and beams creak from the desperation of nails and screws trying to emerge. And even objects that had been lost for a long time appeared from where they had been searched for most and went dragging along in turbulent confusion behind Melquiades' magical irons. Things have a life of their own, the gypsy proclaimed in a harsh accent. It's simply a matter of waking up their soul. Jose Arcadio Buendia, whose unbridled imagination always went beyond the genius of nature and even beyond miracles in magic, thought that it would be possible to make use of this useless invention to extract gold from the bowels of the earth. Melquiades, who was an honest man, warned him, it won't work for that. But Jose Arcadio Buendia, at that time, did not believe in the honesty of gypsies, so he traded his mule and a pair of goats for the 2 magnetized ingots. Ursula Iguaran, his wife, who relied on those animals to increase their poor domestic holdings, was unable to dissuade him. Very soon we'll have enough gold and more to pave the floors of the house, the husband replied. For several months, he worked hard to demonstrate the truth of his idea. He explored every inch of the region, even the riverbed, dragging the 2 iron ingots along and reciting Melquiades' incantation aloud. The only thing he succeeded in doing was to unearth a suit of 15th century armor, which had all of its pieces soldered together with a rust, and inside of which there was a hollow resonance of an enormous stone-filled gourd. When Jose Arcadio Buendia and 4 men of his expedition managed to take the armor apart, they found inside a calcified skeleton with a copper locket containing a woman's hair around its neck. In March, the gypsies returned. This time they brought a telescope and a magnifying glass the size of a drum. They exhibited these latest discoveries of the Jews of Amsterdam. They placed the gypsy woman at one end of the village and set up the telescope at the entrance to the tent. For the price of 5 reales, people could look through the telescope and see the gypsy woman an arm's length away. Science has eliminated distance, Melquiades proclaimed. In a short time, man will be able to see what is happening in any place in the world without leaving his house. A burning noonday sun brought out a startling demonstration with the gigantic magnifying glass. They put a pile of dry hay in the middle of the street and set it on fire by concentrating the sun's rays. Jose Arcadio Buendia, who had still not been consoled for the failure of his magnet, conceived the idea of using that invention as a weapon of war. Again, Melquiades tried to dissuade him, but he finally accepted the 2 magnetized ingots and 3 colonial coins in exchange for the magnifying glass. Ursula wept in consternation. That money was from a chest of gold coins that her father had put together over an entire life of privation, and that she had buried underneath her bed in hopes of a proper occasion to make use of it. Jose Arcadio Buendia made no attempt to console her, completely absorbed in his tactical experiments with the abnegation of a scientist, and even at the risk of his own life. In an attempt to show the effects of the glass on enemy troops, he exposed himself to the concentration of the sun's rays and suffered burns which turned into sores that took a long time to heal. Over the protests of his wife, who was alarmed at such a dangerous invention, at one point he was ready to set the house on fire. He would spend hours on end in his room, calculating the strategic possibilities of his novel weapon, until he succeeded in putting together a manual of startling instructional clarity and irresistible power of conviction. He sent it to the government, accompanied by numerous descriptions of his experiments and several pages of explanatory sketches. By a messenger who crossed the mountains, got lost in measureless swamps, forded stormy rivers, and was on the point of perishing under the lash of despair, plague, and wild beasts, until he found a route that joined one used by the mules that carried the mail. In spite of the fact that a trip to the capital was a little less than impossible at the time, Jose Arcadio Buendia promised to undertake it as soon as the government ordered him that he could put on some practical demonstration of his invention for the military authorities and could train them himself in the complicated art of solar war. For several years, he waited for an answer. Finally, tired of waiting, he bemoaned to Melquiades the failure of his project, and the gypsy then gave him a convincing proof of his honesty. He gave him back the doubloons in exchange for the magnifying glass, and he left him, in addition, some Portuguese maps and several instruments of navigation. In his own handwriting, he set down a concise synthesis of the studied monk Herman, which he left to Jose Arcadio, so that he would be able to make use of the astrolabe, the compass, and the sextant. Jose Arcadio Buendia spent the long months of the rainy season shut up in a small room that he had built in the rear of the house so that no one would disturb his experiments. Having completely abandoned his domestic obligations, he spent entire nights in the courtyard, watching the course of the stars, and he almost contracted sunstroke from trying to establish an exact method to ascertain noon by staring at the sun. When he had become an expert in the use and manipulation of his instruments, he conceived a notion of space that allowed him to navigate across unknown seas, to visit uninhabited territories, and to establish relations with splendid beings without having to leave his study. That was the period in which he acquired the habit of talking to himself, of walking through the house without paying attention to anyone. Ursula and the children broke their backs in the garden, growing banana and caladium, cassava and yams, ahuyama, roots, and eggplants. We actually got some yams in the oven right now. Put those on before doing this live stream. Suddenly, without warning, his feverish activity was interrupted and was replaced by a kind of fascination. He spent several days as if he were bewitched, softly repeating to himself a string of fearful conjecture without giving credit to his own understanding. Finally, one Tuesday in December, at lunchtime, all at once he released the whole weight of his torment. The children would remember for the rest of their lives the august solemnity with which their father, devastated by his prolonged vigil and by the wrath of his imagination, revealed his discovery to them. The earth is round, like an orange. Ursula lost her patience. "If you have gone crazy, please go crazy all by yourself," she shouted. "But don't try to put your gypsy ideas into the heads of the children." Jose Arcadio Buendia, impassive, did not let himself be frightened by the desperation of his wife, who in a seizure of rage smashed the astrolabe against the floor. He built another one. He gathered the men of his village into his little room, and he demonstrated to them, with theories that none of them could understand, the possibility of returning to where one had set out by constantly sailing east. The whole village was convinced that Jose Arcadio Buendia had lost his reason when Melquiades returned to set things straight. He gave public praise to the intelligence of a man who, from pure astronomical speculation, had evolved a theory that had already been proved in practice, although unknown in Macondo until then, and as a proof of his admiration, he made him a gift that was to have a profound influence on the future of the village, the laboratory of an alchemist. By then, Melquiades had aged with surprising rapidity. On his first trips, he seemed to be the same age as Jose Arcadio Buendia, but while the latter had preserved his extraordinary strength, which permitted him to pull down a horse by grabbing its ears, the gypsy seemed to be worn down by some tenacious illness. It was in reality the result of multiple and rare diseases contracted on his innumerable trips around the world. According to what he himself said as he spoke to Jose Arcadio Buendia while helping him set up the laboratory, death followed him everywhere, sniffing at the cuffs of his pants, but never deciding to give him the final clutch of his claws. He was a fugitive from all plagues and catastrophes that had ever lashed mankind. He had survived pellagra in Persia, scurvy in the Malayan archipelago, leprosy in Alexandria, beriberi in Japan, bubonic plague in Madagascar, an earthquake in Sicily, and a disastrous shipwreck in the Straits of Magellan. That prodigious creature, said to possess the keys of Nostradamus, was a gloomy man, enveloped in a sad aura, with an Asiatic look that seemed to know what there was on the other side of things. He wore a large black hat that looked like a raven with widespread wings, and a velvet vest across which the patina of centuries had skated. But in spite of his immense wisdom and his mysterious breadth, he had a human burden, an earthly condition that kept him involved in the small problems of daily life. He would complain of the ailments of old age. He suffered from the most insignificant economic difficulties, and he had stopped laughing a long time back because the scurvy had made his teeth drop out. On that suffocating noontime when the gypsy revealed his secrets, Jose Arcadio Buendia had the certainty that this was the beginning of a great friendship. The children were startled by his fantastic stories. Aureliano, who could not have been more than 5 at the time, would remember him for the rest of his life as he saw him that afternoon, sitting against the metallic and quivering light from the window, lighting up from his deep, deep organ voice the darkest reaches of the imagination, while down over his temples there flowed the grease that was being melted by the heat. This is at a time when you had to listen to stories. There was no radio or TV. Jose Arcadio, his older brother, would pass on that wonderful image as a hereditary memory to all of his descendants. Ursula, on the other hand, held a bad memory of that visit, for she had entered the room just as Melquiades had carelessly broken a flask of bichloride of mercury. "It's the smell of the devil," she said. "Not at all," Melquiades corrected her. "It has been proven that the devil has sulfuric properties, and this is just a little corrosive supplement." Always didactic, he went into a learned exposition of the diabolical properties of cinnabar, but Ursula paid no attention to him, although she took the children off to pray. That biting odor would stay forever in her mind, linked to the memories of Melquiades. The rudimentary laboratory, in addition to the profusion of pots, funnels, retorts, filters, and sieves, was made up of a primitive water pipe, a glass beaker with a long, thin neck, a reproduction of the philosopher's egg, and a still the gypsies themselves had built in according with the modern descriptions of the 3-armed alembic Mary the Jew. Along with those items, Melquiades left samples of the 7 metals that corresponded with the 7 planets, the formulas of Moses, and Zosimus for doubling the quantity of gold, and a set of notes and sketches concerning the processes of the great teaching that would permit those who could interpret them to understand the manufacture of the philosopher's stone. Seduced by the simplicity of the formulas to double the quantity of gold, Jose Arcadio Buendia paid court to Ursula for several weeks so that she would let him dig up her colonial coins and increase them by as many as it were possible to subdivide mercury. Ursula gave in, as always, to her husband's unyielding obstinacy. When Jose Arcadio Buendia threw 3 doubloons into a pan and fused them with copper filings, orpiment, brimstone, and lead, he put it all to boil in a pot of castor oil until he got a thick and pestilential syrup, which is more like common caramel than valuable gold. In risky and desperate processes of distillation, melted with 7 planetary metals, mixed with hermetic mercury and vitriol of Cyprus, and put back to cook in hog fat for lack of any radish oil, Ursula's precious inheritance was reduced to a large piece of burnt hog cracklings that was firmly stuck to the bottom of the pot. When the gypsies came back, Ursula had turned the whole population of the village against them. But curiosity was greater than fear. For that time, the gypsies went about the town making a deafening noise with all manner of musical instruments, while our hawker announced the exhibition of the most fabulous discovery as nasi ancinis. So that everyone went to the tent, and by paying 1 cent, they saw a youthful Melquiades, recovered, unwrinkled, and with a new and flashing set of teeth. Those who remembered his gums that had been destroyed by scurvy, his flaccid cheeks, his withered lips, trembled with fear at the final proof of the gypsy's supernatural powers. The fear turned into panic when Melquiades took out his teeth, intact, encased in their gums, and showed them to the audience for an instant, a fleeting instant in which he went back to being the same decrepit man of years past, and put them back again, and smiled once more with the full control of his restored youth. Even Jose Arcadio Buendia himself considered that Melquiades' knowledge had reached unbearable extremes, but he felt a healthy excitement when the gypsy explained to him alone the workings of his false teeth. It seemed so simple and so prodigious at the same time that overnight he lost all interest in his experiments in alchemy. He underwent a new crisis of bad humor. He did not go back to eating regularly, and he would spend the day walking through the house. Incredible things are happening in the world, he said to Ursula. Right there across the river, there are all kinds of magical instruments, while we keep on living like donkeys. Those who had known him since the foundation of Macondo were startled at how much he had changed under Melquiades' influence. At first, Jose Arcadio Buendia had been a kind of youthful patriarch who would give instructions for planting and advice for the raising of children and animals, who would collaborate with everyone, even in the physical work, for the welfare of the community. Since his house was the very first that had been built best in the village, and the others had built in its image and likeness. It had a small, well-lighted living room, a dining room in the shape of a terrace with gaily colored flowers, 2 bedrooms, and a courtyard with a gigantic chestnut tree, a well-kept garden, and a corral where goats, pigs, and hens lived in peaceful communion. The only animals that were prohibited, not just in the house, but in the entire settlement, were fighting cocks. Ursula's capacity for work was the same as that as her husband. Active, small, severe, that woman of unbreakable nerves, who at no moment in her life had been heard to sing, seemed to be everywhere, from dawn until quite late at night, always pursued by the soft whisperings of her stiff, starched petticoats. Thanks to her, the floors of tamped earth and unwhitewashed mud walls, the rustic wood furniture they had built themselves, were always clean, and the old chests where they kept their clothing exhaled the warm smell of basil. Jose Arcadio Buendia, who was the most enterprising man ever to be seen in the village, had set up the placement of the houses in such a way that from all of them one could reach the river and draw water with the same effort, and he had lined up the streets with such good sense that no one house got more sun than the other during the hot time of the day. Within a few years, Macondo was a village that was more orderly and hardworking than any known until then by its 300 inhabitants. It was truly a happy village, where no one was over 30 years of age and where no one had died. Since the time of its founding, Jose Arcadio Buendia had built traps and cages. In a short time, he filled not only his own house, but all of those in the village with troupials, canaries, bee-eaters, and redbreasts. The concert of so many different birds became so disturbing that Ursula would plug her ears with beeswax so as not to lose her sense of reality. The first time that Melquiades' tribe arrived, selling glass balls for headaches, everyone was surprised that they had been able to find that village, lost in the drowsiness of the swamp, and the gypsies confessed that they had found their way by the song of the birds. That spirit of social initiative disappeared in a short time, pulled away by the fever of the magnets, the astronomical calculations, the dreams of transmutation, and the urge to discover the wonders of the world. From a clean and active man, Jose Arcadio Buendia changed into a man lazy in appearance, careless in his dress, with a wild beard that Ursula managed to trim with great effort and a kitchen knife. There were many who considered him the victim of some strange spell, but even those most convinced of his madness left work and family to follow him when he brought out his tools to clear the land and asked the assembled group to open a way that would put Macondo in contact with the great inventions. Jose Arcadio Buendia was completely ignorant of the geography of the region. He knew that to the east there lay an impenetrable mountain chain, and that on the other side of the mountain there was an ancient city of Rio Hacha, where in times past, according to what he had been told by the first Aureliano Buendia, his grandfather, Sir Francis Drake had gone crocodile hunting with cannons, and that he repaired them and stuffed them with straw to bring to Queen Elizabeth. In his youth, Jose Arcadio Buendia and his men, with wives and children, animals, and all of the domestic implements, had crossed the mountains in search of an outlet to the sea, and after 26 months they gave up the expedition and founded Macondo, so they would not have to go back. It was therefore a route that did not interest them, for it could only lead to the past. To the south lay the swamps, covered with an eternal vegetable scum, and the whole vast universe of the great swamp, which, according to what the gypsies had said, had no limits. The great swamp in the west mingled with a boundless extension of water, where there were soft-skinned cetaceans that had the head and torso of a woman, causing the ruination of sailors with the charm of their extraordinary breasts. The gypsies sailed along the route for 6 months before they reached the strip of land over which the mules that carried the mail passed. According to Jose Arcadio Buendia's calculations, the only possibility of contact with civilization lay along the northern route. So he handed out clearing tools and hunting weapons to the same men who had been with him during the founding of Macondo. He threw his directional instruments and his map into a knapsack, and he undertook the reckless adventure. During the first days, they did not come across any appreciable obstacle. They went down along the stony bank of the river to the place where, years before, they had found the soldier's armor. And from there, they went into the woods along a path between wild orange trees. At the end of the first week, they killed and roasted a deer, but they agreed to eat only half of it and salt the rest for the days that lay ahead. With that precaution, they tried to postpone the necessity of having to eat macaws, whose blue flesh had a harsh and musky taste. Then, for more than 10 days, they did not see the sun again. The ground became soft and damp, like volcanic ash, and the vegetation was thicker and thicker, and the cries of the birds and the uproar of the monkeys became more and more remote, and the world became eternally sad. The men on the expedition felt overwhelmed by their most ancient memories in that paradise of dampness and silence, going back to before original sin. As their boots sank into the pools of steaming oil and their machetes destroyed bloody initials, on them with an ink brush. Skip the page there. The machetes destroyed bloody lilies and golden salamanders. For a week, almost without speaking, they went ahead like sleepwalkers through a universe of grief, lighted only by the tenuous reflection of luminous insects, and their lungs were overwhelmed by a suffocating smell of blood. They could not return because the strip that they were opening up as they went along would soon close up with new vegetation that almost seemed to grow before their eyes. "It's all right," Jose Arcadio Buendia would say. "The main thing is not to lose our bearings." Always following his compass, he kept on guiding his men toward the invisible north, so that they would be able to get out of that enchanted region. It was a thick night, starless, but the darkness was becoming impregnated with the fresh and clear air. Exhausted by the long crossing, they hung up their hammocks and slept deeply for the first time in 2 weeks. When they woke up, with the sun already high in the sky, they were speechless with fascination. Before them, surrounded by ferns and palm trees, white and powdery in the silent morning light, was an enormous Spanish galleon. Tilted slightly to the starboard, it had hanging from its intact mast the dirty rags of its sails in the midst of its rigging, which was adorned with orchids. The hull, covered with an armor of petrified barnacles and soft moss, was firmly fastened into a surface of stones. The whole structure seemed to occupy its own space, one of solitude and oblivion, protected from the vices of time and the habits of the birds. Inside, where the expeditionaries explored with careful intent, there was nothing but a thick forest of flowers. The discovery of the galleon, an indication of the proximity of the sea, broke Jose Arcadio Buendia's drive. He considered it a trick of his whimsical fate to have searched for the sea without finding it, at the cost of countless sacrifices and suffering, and to have found it all of a sudden without looking for it, as if it lay across his path like an insurmountable object. Many years later, Colonel Aureliano Buendia crossed that region again, when it was already a regular mail route. And the only part of the ship he found was its burned out frame in the midst of a field of poppies. Only then, convinced that the story had not been some product of his father's imagination, did he wonder how the galleon had been able to get inland to that spot. But Jose Arcadio Buendia did not concern himself with that. When he found the galleon after another 4 days' journey, when he found the sea after another 4 days' journey from the galleon, his dreams ended as he faced that ashen, foamy, dirty sea, which had not merited the risks and sacrifices of the adventure. "God damn it," he shouted. "Macondo is surrounded by water on all sides." I'm going to leave that one right there. What beautiful writing from Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Really a pleasure. If you haven't read this book, or if you have, it's time to come back to it. Wowee wow. Well, we're coming upon the end, everyone. I want to thank you for joining me. I hope this has helped you relax in the evening. It is coming upon bedtime, although I do have to go work the night shift in the ER. So I'm going to go out to those front lines. But I want to remind everyone, please look online for actions around May 1st. There's going to be some types of strikes, rent strikes, chance for working class people and people who wish they had a job right now, class people, to raise their voices and see what we can do to make our society a little bit better. And to that, I want to end by reading my favorite story, of course, from the legends of the Yosemite Miwok, The Greed of Hisik the Skunk. Hisik the Skunk and his wife had a daughter who, when she grew up, married Uwell the Gray Fox. Gray Fox was a good hunter, and he and the skunk, who was chief, often hunted together. Not far from Skunk's home, were two high hills standing side by side. In the narrow gap between them ran the trail of Sokoi, the elk. One day, Skunk told Gray Fox to hide in this narrow place while he went down to the plain to drive up the elk. So Gray Fox hid there, and Skunk went down near the elk and fired his terrible scent. The elk could not stand the smell and ran up the trail. Gray Fox waited until the leader and all others had passed between the hills, and when the last one had gone by, he stepped behind them and fired his arrows with such force that it shot through the whole band of elk, killing them all. When Skunk arrived at the scene, he was so glad that he danced. He called all the people to come and help carry the meat home, and he said to Gray Fox, "You must pack one elk, and pack me too, for I'm too tired to walk." Gray Fox was afraid of Skunk, and so did as he was told. He lifted a big elk on his shoulders, and the skunk climbed on top. Skunk danced on the body of the elk all the way back to the village. Tired. Then Skunk told the people to skin the elk and promised them some of the meat. They skinned the elk and cut up the meat in strips and hung it up to dry. When they had done this, they asked him for their share. Skunk refused to give them any, but told them that they might eat acorn mush and peenol, that's ground pine nuts. He then turned as if he were going to shoot his scent, and everyone was afraid. Skunk was so greedy that he would not give any of the meat to anyone, not even his own wife or daughter, nor to his son-in-law who had killed it. He put it all away to dry for himself. The next day he told Gray Fox to hunt again, and they did the same as before. When the elk were in the narrow pass between the hills, Gray Fox shot his arrow and killed them all, as before. Then Skunk called the people to come and carry the elk home, and made Gray Fox carry one, and he danced on top all the way, just as before. Again he told the people to skin the elk and that he would give them meat for supper. But when he had skinned the elk and cut up the meat, he told them to eat acorns and peenol, at the same time turning to frighten them. Skunk took all the meat to dry for himself, just as he had done before. The people were very angry, but were afraid to do anything, for fear Skunk would shoot his scent and kill them. They talked the matter over for a long time, and finally a wise man said, "What are we going to do? Must we hunt for him and pack his meat and skin it for him always and not get any? We'd better kill him. But how can we kill him so he will not shoot his scent and kill us?" Then Two-Wick the Badger spoke. He said, "We can kill him." And while Skunk was watching his meat so that no one could take any of it, Badger dug a big hole and built a fire in it. Someone asked him why he had made the fire. Badger replied, "Do you not know that Skunk is a great dancer, and he loves to dance? We will have a fire in the hole and cover over the top with sticks and leaves and earth so he can't see anything. Then we will send for him to come and dance. And when he dances, he will break through and fall, and we shall kill him." And the people answered, "All right." When it was dark, they sent a messenger to Skunk. He said, "You are a great dancer. We want you to dance tonight, and we will pay you well if you will come." Now we know he's proud and greedy, so of course he wants to show off, especially if he's getting paid. Skunk was pleased and answered, "All right, where shall I dance?" They took him to the place, pointed to it, and said, "Right there." Skunk began to dance and sing. Everyone said, "Good, you're doing well. Keep on, you're doing finely. Go ahead, you're surely a great dancer." And they flattered him, and he kept on and danced harder and harder, for he was proud and wanted to show what he could do. After a while, when Skunk was dancing the hardest, the sticks broke, and he fell into the hole. The people were ready. They had a big rock, which it had taken many people to bring. That's teamwork. They had to work together. They were waiting, and the moment that Skunk fell in, they pushed the rock quickly over the hole and held it down. They all climbed up on it and held it down tight, so Skunk could not get out. The hot coals burnt Skunk's feet and made him dance. He was very angry and shot his scent so hard against the side of the hole that he pushed the mountain up on both sides. Then he turned the other way and shot again and pushed mountains up on that side too. After this, his scent was gone, and the coals burnt him and killed him. Then all the people were happy. The next day, the people had a great feast and ate all the dried elk meat they wanted. Woo! Sometimes you got to deal with the skunk. Anyways, good night, everybody. This has been Mikhail with your quarantine bedtime story time here in occupied lockdown Alone land. Wishing everyone good night, much health, and I will see you guys next time.